I've chosen to talk about today is what I'm calling the 21st century skills gap, because I believe this is one of the greatest challenges of our time. It's something that increasingly affects every part of society, and we see it in the headlines all around us every day, in unemployment figures, in the wage gap, in the wealth gap, in rising levels of poverty. Now, the theme of this conference is catalyzing change, and it's appropriate that we're gathered here at one of the world's greatest public universities, because if there's any institution that's in need of transformational change, it's public higher education. Public higher education is facing a perfect storm, a combination of rising costs, student demand that outstrips enrollment capacity, state and government funding slashed, classes overflowing, and even when a student does manage to find a way to fund his or her education and manage to get through and get a degree, that degree is no longer a guarantee of employment. My heart breaks when I see these headlines every day. I'm a product of public education. I actually got my degree here at UC Berkeley in biophysics. But when I see these headlines, hundreds of thousands turned away from community colleges. California now spends more on our correction system, our prison system, than on higher education. And on our current trajectory, California will be 1 million graduates short of economic demand by 2025. This is crazy. Not only that, but students are increasingly shouldering a higher share of the cost of education. Actually, now tuition comprises nearly 50% of the cost of delivering public education. It's skyrocketed. And not surprisingly, student debt has reached record numbers. 2/3 of college graduates now graduate in debt, averaging $25,000 debt per student. College tuition now costs 3 times what it did 20 years ago, and debt now outstrips credit card debt. Student debt outstrips credit card debt nationwide. It's $1 trillion. And yet, despite spending all this money on education, we've got a generation of under and too often unemployed graduates. In fact, globally, 75 million young people are unemployed, nearly 12 million here in the US. And more than half of US graduates are either unemployed or underemployed, recent graduates. And young people are 3 times as likely to be unemployed as their parents were. So clearly, there's a huge problem on the debt side and on the unemployment side, and yet employers can't find skilled workers. How can that be? 46% of employers say they can't find skilled workers even for entry-level jobs. And millions of high-tech jobs are going unfilled. I can tell you, if you drive down to Silicon Valley right now, you're going to find a lot of job openings down there. And there are 3.2 million or 3 million jobs open and unfilled here in the US. So something's wrong with this equation. And you see that actually in this study. This is a study that McKinsey did. Asked 3 different groups of people, students, employers, and education providers, universities, whether they felt that graduates were qualified, prepared for employment. Well, only 45% of students, graduates, felt they were prepared. Only 42% of employers felt those graduates were prepared, but 72% of education providers at universities felt that they were doing just fine preparing students for employment in the 21st century. So we've got a big disconnect here. There's a communication problem, clearly, between employers and education providers, among other things. And also, students too often don't know what courses, what classes to take to prepare themselves for the jobs of the 21st century. So we've got a big challenge. Our challenge is to preserve the excellence of the public university system that has been the envy of the world by simultaneously dramatically increasing access, cutting unnecessary cost, and transforming curriculum for 21st century needs. Now, in the face of a huge challenge, I always turn to innovation. And the best chance we have is to innovate our way out of this. Fortunately, in fact, the public education system, higher education, has its roots in the US in radical, innovative thinking. The public university system here in the US actually was formed out of legislation that President Lincoln signed over 150 years ago. It was called the Morrill Land Grant Act. It actually was born out of crisis, a crisis that was the Civil War. And this education system, Lincoln founded based on Thomas Jefferson's vision, nearly 100 years earlier. Jefferson had envisioned a network of universities that would be open to all citizens, that would produce, foster, an educated, informed citizenry, and meritocracy, where ideas and intellect trump privilege and status. So have we delivered on Jefferson's vision? Well, in some ways, yes, but we face now a new crisis, the skills gap. And this is a crisis that is affecting everybody. Industry, institutions, students, governments, everybody. Now, we need a revolution. We need a revolution in teaching, in the teaching model. And the good news is, we've got people who are actually working on doing exactly that. A model that creates an open content platform that increases the access to every form of content in higher education, that's personalized, that's interactive, that's collaborative and engaging, and that breaks down the silos, the barriers between institutions that have existed for too long. Now, that revolution is taking form in something called the MOOC revolution. It's a funny name, and it's not a new idea exactly. It stands for Massive Open Online Courses. But the MOOC revolution is actually accomplishing some pretty interesting things. What's happening is higher education is collaborating with entrepreneurs and innovators. And they're delivering courseware now to massive numbers of students who are able to access some of the world's great universities' teachings, content, online, anywhere. Now there's skepticism, there's concern about whether a model like this might replace teachers. There's skepticism about all these large numbers of students that are enrolling in online classes. Are they really actually learning anything? But the fact is, we're finding, yes, there's some remarkable success happening. In fact, there's a circuit design class that was offered by MIT and through edX, and it increased learning rates from 59% to 91%. This is actually, that label is wrong, 59% to 91% when it was offered. That's remarkable. Now that's not because students suddenly learn more when they learn it online. It's because the teaching model simultaneously was transformed. And we're learning more about what happens when students take these online courses. This is a graph that someone named Phil Hill, who did a lot of research in this area, created that shows us sort of 4 different kinds of categories of students or learners in taking online courses. In this case, he studied Coursera's offerings. There's a category called lurkers. And the lurkers are students who are learners who might show up for one video, watch one video, and then not really engage further. Then there's the drop-ins. The drop-ins might be interested in part of the content of a course. Maybe they watch a few videos during the course of that class, but they don't really get engaged. Then there's the passive participants. They actually complete all of the content, they watch the whole thing, but they don't really get involved, they don't interact with other students and professors. And then there's the active participants. The active participants is where we're finding these dramatic changes and increases in learning. In fact, there's something interesting going on. There's a new acronym that was actually coined right here at Berkeley, SPOCs, Small Private Online Classes. And in SPOCs, you can watch MOOC videos, these videos outside of class. There's interactive content, quizzes, labs, and tests that students do before they even get to class. And then once they're in class, instructors, TAs, answer questions for the first 15 minutes. And then for the remaining time, students work together in groups, collaborating with each other, and also do individual work. So this ends up being a far more collaborative learning environment. And in fact, I was talking to some of the students that recently completed one of these SPOC courses, and one of these students said that she never would show up for the lecture before in the typical traditional lecture hall style. But she never misses one of these SPOC classes because she learns so much from the other questions that students ask, other students' questions and curiosity. So there's something happening when a student says that she won't miss a class. She'll do anything to avoid missing class. That means there's serious learning going on. Now, a lot of people have talked about MOOCs as a way of cutting costs, of online education, delivery of online as a way of cutting costs. I don't think that that's what the revolution is. I believe that online delivery of courses has to do with massive access increase, the opportunity for many more people to access this content, and also this new transformational learning model. It's much more personalized, engaging, and collaborative. But there are other places, untapped sources of cost savings in higher education. These numbers show it. Only 50% of undergraduates receive a degree in 6 years. That's remarkable. And not only that, but 55%, this is actually an old version of the presentation, I apologize for that. The new one suddenly somehow didn't get loaded in, but 55% of students need remediation, and that's at a cost of tens of billions of dollars every year. And the typical student actually ends up attending multiple universities, and that totals $30 billion lost due to credits that don't transfer. So let me drill down a little bit more on that. Your typical California higher public education student receives or attends, on average, 3 different institutions, say a community college and then transfers to Cal State, or attends Cal State and transfers to one of the UC campuses. And when they do that, too often, courses they've already taken, they end up having to repeat, even if they ace those courses. And that's because every institution typically believes that its own content, its curriculum, is unique and extraordinary. And so this ends up costing tens of billions of dollars every year. That's crazy. And in fact, students end up taking, on average, a whole extra year of course credits, 155 units on average, instead of the 120 that typically you need for a 4-year degree. This is average across the U.S. public higher education. That's nuts. So, this is something we can do. This is a problem we can solve. We can do something about this. What if we redesigned and consolidated the top 25 to 40 lower division courses offered at public universities? And what if we offered that open, available to anyone at nominal cost, for free? And most importantly, what if we made the transfer of those credits seamless? So think about, for example, Visa. What Visa did to revolutionize the financial services industry. They made it possible to swipe a credit card in a shop anywhere in the world, on any underlying financial transaction system, and it just simply works. It's universal and standardized. And so it's the same idea here. If we focus on that core curriculum that's so critical in lower division classes, standardize it, make it open also, by the way, to high school students so they can avoid that need for remediation. Remediation means you have to take a class that you should have learned already in high school. You have to actually repeat it in college. That's nuts. If we created courseware that any high school student could access before they even get to college, they could avoid that problem. So this is actually an enormous opportunity to save money. In fact, studies have shown that this approach across the U.S., if implemented in every state, could save $9.7 billion annually. And that's serious money. Now let me talk a little bit about STEM. Now, there's a lot of talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And this is another area where there's a lot of waste, a lot of unnecessary cost in delivering education. And also, the outcomes aren't very impressive. Now, that said, this is really where the jobs are. If you look at the numbers, there's 3.6 unemployed workers for every job in the U.S. right now. But there's only 1 unemployed STEM worker for every 2 unfilled STEM jobs. So clearly, there's a lot of opportunity in the job market. But yet, too many young adults decide against pursuing STEM education or even considering a career in technology or science because, for several reasons, 34% say they don't know much about what it's like. In fact, they kind of have an idea that maybe there's a bunch of nerds sitting around in cubicles. It's not that interesting. 33% felt that this courseware is just too challenging. And 28% felt that they're not well prepared it turns out, again, this is something we can do, we can actually address. And we need to, because here in the US, we lag behind pretty much most developed countries when it comes to STEM education. Less than 16% of all degrees in the US are in STEM. And by comparison, 47% in France. You can see the numbers here, 38% in South Korea, 50% in China, and 67% in Singapore. So this is pretty stark difference. And yet, again, back to the jobs. 5 out of every new jobs and 8 out of 10 of the highest paying positions will be in STEM-related careers over the next decade. Now, increasing the graduation rate, let me go back there. If we actually just increase the graduation rate and that throughput, that statistic about the fact that 50% of students, only 50% actually complete a degree in 6 years, well, if we just focused on STEM majors and increased that percent by just 10%, we could actually produce 750,000 more STEM graduates by the end of the decade. And that actually starts getting close to the goal that President Obama set of increasing the number of STEM graduates by the end of the decade by 1 million. So just incremental improvement, incremental change can really affect the numbers. Again, how do we do that? Well, it comes back to transforming the learning model, the teaching and learning model. And this is again where we're seeing some pretty exciting results. Here at Berkeley, there are actually 5 MOOC STEM classes being offered. I know there are a lot of acronyms here, but it's actually pretty exciting because those classes are seeing a lot of enthusiasm on the part of the students and the professors. And at San Jose State, in partnership with Udacity, the first MOOC courses offered for credit were launched this past January. And we're, again, seeing a lot of enthusiasm on the part of the teachers and students. So the results are pretty impressive. Again, we looked at these figures before, the circuit design class. When you get an engaged, collaborative learning environment, the numbers really change. Now, I want to drill down a little bit more on the STEM numbers. It turns out that within STEM, the greatest job growth is in computer science, and in fact, across all majors, that is the case. This is a chart that shows different majors and both the job availability as well as the number of graduates. And so you see here, the greatest job growth is in computer science, over 150,000 jobs every year, and yet it's dwarfed, say, by social sciences. We have 250,000 social science grads every year in the US. We have just over 50,000, only 50,000 computer science grads. And you can see the stark difference in jobs. Only 25,000 jobs for social science graduates, and yet we have 250,000 students graduating in that field. Now that doesn't mean that everyone should go be a computer science student, you should stop studying social science. But it does mean that we have to do a better job of encouraging young people who do want to study computer science, who are interested in that, and actually catch them before they turn off. The jobs, again, are here. 120,000 jobs this year, 1.4 million jobs will be created in computer science and computer programming by 2020, and yet only 2.4% of degrees are in computer science. Not only that, but we're leaving a good chunk of the population behind. The percent of women majoring in computer science and graduating with computer science degrees has actually declined over the past 25 years, dramatically, from a high of 34% to what it is right now, which is around 12%. How could that be? In an era where computing technology is one of the hottest fields around, how could women be turning away from computing? It makes no sense. Especially because the first programmers were actually women. This is a picture of women programmers at a place called Bletchley Park in the United Kingdom in World War II. These women actually helped decode the Nazi Enigma machine. This was a top secret initiative. No one knew about it, even not only during the war, but even for years after the war. But these women were instrumental in helping shorten the length of World War II by 3 years, it's estimated. And there's another example. The first computers computers were actually women. The ENIAC machine you might be familiar with, this was one of the first big mainframe computers. Again, during World War II, the Army recruited a group of women out of the University of Pennsylvania to calculate ballistics trajectories. And these were very complex equations. They needed a lot of basically hands-on computation. And so these women, using very complex differential equations, computed ballistics trajectories and then manually plugged those results into these ENIAC machines. And they called the women computers because they were computing these ballistics trajectory equations. And in pictures of the ENIAC from that era, you sometimes see women standing next to the ENIAC or seeming to plug something in the machine. Many people thought for years after that these women were models. They called them refrigerator ladies because these mainframes were the size of refrigerators. But in fact, they were some of the first programmers. So we're doing a terrible job of exposing young women to computing. It's clear that women can make great computer scientists. So what do we do about that? We've got a few in the audience here, I see. Well, turns out that there's a good way to address this. Diversity obviously is important because we need better products. The more diversity we have in the people that build those products, the better the products are. We need more engineers. It's pretty clear the reasons. But the problem is that only 1 in 10 K-12 schools actually teaches computer science. So in high school, it's a pretty good chance you're not even going to have a chance to take a computer science class. And that class actually doesn't even count towards graduation. It doesn't even count towards math or science requirements. So there are great organizations like Code.org, for example, and Girls Who Code, and the Science Society for Women Engineering, who've actually attacked this problem, and they're doing great work. And there are companies like Microsoft and Google that are funding putting computer science teachers into the schools. And that's really great stuff, and we need to do more of that. You should check out this video on code.org. It's pretty cool. But it turns out that there's something called child-driven learning. Again, apologies, this is an old version of the presentation. Somehow the new one didn't get loaded in, so I'm just going to talk. Don't look at the screen. There's something called child-driven learning. It turns out that kids, are pretty good at teaching themselves when they have the right tools and content. And there's a study, actually, that's been done. It's called the Hole in the Wall experiment. And Sugata Mitra, who's the winner of the TED Prize this year, actually has won a TED Prize for taking this study and making it global. He calls it the classroom in the cloud. The study that he did was, he was working in a high-tech company in India. It was next to a slum. There was a wall between the slum and the high-tech company. He carved a hole in that wall, and he installed a computer, a PC, and then he walked away. He didn't leave any instructions or anything. He wanted to see what the kids would do. Turned out, within a few days, they had taught themselves how to use the computer, the applications on the computer. They were quite sophisticated. And these were kids that didn't have any education, never seen a computer before. He took that experiment, he expanded it to villages, 2 more villages in India, saw the same results. And then the MIT Media Lab took that experiment and actually brought it to Ethiopia this past year. They launched a project with tablets, and very low-cost tablets. Tablets that were loaded with applications that helped kids learn. This is an application called Hopscotch. It just got launched actually this week in New York. This was not preloaded onto those tablets in Ethiopia. But it's another example of applications that help kids learn, teach themselves programming. And in Ethiopia, those kids who'd never seen a computer before, never even seen an on-off switch, were able to, within 4 minutes, turn the tablet on. Within 5 days, they were actually using about 47 applications each. Within 2 weeks, they had taught themselves their ABCs. Again, they'd never spoken English before. And within 5 months, they had hacked the tablet. They had actually hacked Android and turned on a feature, the camera feature that had been turned off. So it's clear. Kids can teach themselves if you give them powerful tools and engaging apps. And we're actually taking this idea. There's a $60 tablet. This is a tablet that actually, at cost, $60. It's globally sourced, manufactured all over the world. And it's coming to the US, and it's preloaded with applications. It actually has also a smartphone installed and high-def video. It's a gigahertz processor. It's the speed of an iPad 1. And a group of us in Silicon Valley are going to take this tablet and get it into the hands of as many kids in the US as possible, especially focusing on low-income school districts and kids that wouldn't normally have the opportunity to get a tablet. And we're going to see if kids can teach themselves to code. And then we're going to run experiments. We're going to run an apps contest and give prizes, cash prizes this summer. And we're going to see what happens. But these are the exciting tools. It's an experiment, it's a start. But this is the future of learning. Got just a few more minutes.
We need to run it now.
I will
Thank
wrap
you so
up.
much, Kim. We're very over time, unfortunately.